Greetings, PsychU community. Rachel Self here from Otsuka Neuroscience Medical Affairs. Today we're going to be talking with Alan Tony Amberg, covering some information about psychological first aid by nurses for nurses. A conversation with Tony. Alan Tony Amberg is the Nurses Corner Section Advisor for PsychU. He is also a psychiatric consult liaison, psychiatric nurse practitioner at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and does outpatient clinic work at Seven Hills Healthcare Center in Chicago, Illinois. Tony, really appreciate your time today, and we thank you so much for sharing some of your very valuable insights with our PsychU community.
Hi, it's great to be here. Hello, PsychU community. So have you been enjoying the last 6 weeks? A little bit of a departure from the usual. We needed to mix it up a little bit, didn't we? What the heck? Bring in a pandemic. Why not? Seriously, how are you coping? So our conversation today is about psychological first aid. And one of the reasons why we're talking about it is because I really genuinely believe that nurses have a super important role to play. And so Rachel and I are going to talk about this a little bit with you. And so Dr. Self, you want to start with our first question?
So actually, you know, one of the things that I thought would be great to start off with, we've had some conversations, especially one recently, where you just shared some beautiful insights into sort of what drew you into the nursing profession in the first place. So I think I'll throw you that softball first. Could you share with our PsychU community some of your perspectives on the nursing field and what draws nurses into it?
Well, so I'm a second generation. My mom was a nurse, and she was a public health nurse at first in the 1940s. Now we have to remember, this is about the time that antibiotics are only just being introduced, right? And mom's initial training was in psychiatry. So, you know, they say the acorn doesn't fall far from the tree. It just took me a while to get here, because I remember being a boy. And I think at one point I said to Mom, I want to be a nurse like you. And she looked at me, and you know how moms are with the finger, right? She says, you will not be a nurse. People don't listen to nurses. You will be a doctor or you will be nothing. Well, it took me a long time to get to nursing. I've come to it as my career in midlife. And I've come to the conclusion that Mom was not right about that. Mom was, if only Mom could see what nursing is like today. We are for years now the most trusted profession. And especially in times like this, people turn to nurses. And we are the people who are on the ground. We're there all the time. We're the ones who are, you know, when you have a question, when you need somebody for that day-to-day, moment-by-moment, what do I do thing, you turn to a nurse, right? Which is not in any way to diminish the role of physicians, who have also been incredibly important, amazing leaders during this. But there is something special about this lineage that has been handed down to us from, you know, we're descended initially from holy people, from monks and from nuns, who, what did they do? They took care of people who had diseases that had no cure. You know, they went toward the people who nobody else could be around. And so when a patient is too dangerous to go near, and you're the one who goes toward them, you're either crazy or you're something wonderful. And I happen to believe we're something wonderful. And so it's been wonderful for me to see how nurses have played such a vital role during the COVID epidemic. And I think it really takes us back to basics. You know, here we are, May 12th is the anniversary of Florence Nightingale's birthday, her 200th anniversary of her birth. And what was her great innovation? Her great innovation was that when we clear the obstacles away around from a patient and we give them sanitary, humane, and caring circumstances, they stop dying, they get better. And so here we are again with a disease that has no cure. And what we're doing is just that. We're not exactly sure what works, although that is coming into focus faster than probably any major disease in history. But we're clearing away the obstacles. We're letting people know they're supported. And then that beautiful resiliency and energy that humans bring to life, they're fighting their way back. Here we are. I'm glad to be part of it.
And we're glad you're part of it too. And we're glad that that was probably the one and only time that your mother was wrong. So we're glad that you went into nursing.
As she reminded me many times, that was the one and only time she was wrong.
I'm sure it was. So you've kind of already started this segue into speaking a little bit about our pandemic situation. Obviously, that's the topic of conversation for everybody these days. Could you speak just a little bit more about the current situation for you and your staff and colleagues at Northwestern Memorial Hospital? What has changed as a result of the coronavirus outbreak and any sort of specific challenges that you and your nursing colleagues are facing now that might be markedly different than life before COVID?
Well, you know, it's interesting because one of the things that's happened that I'm very excited about is that this really has proved to be like other health conditions, right? We started off in a situation where, of course, people are very afraid, they're very nervous. And initially, our nurses who went into COVID units, and that, by the way, was true across the staff, phlebotomists, x-ray techs, and so on. And as we have learned more about what works and what doesn't work, people have really been rising to the challenge. I mean, you know, there is no question that is incredibly stressful. I do meet nurses who have trouble sleeping at night. I do meet nurses who are still very concerned about bringing this home, especially if they have family members, elderly parents, or family members who are immune compromised, or children. But what's striking to me is how uniformly nurses have said to me, I would rather be here. I would rather be here taking care of my patients and on the front line than sitting at home doing nothing. Now, are they stressed? Sure, some of them are. And there's no question that the no visitor policy has been hard. When you have a patient who's dying and you become the person at their bedside, I think this is a role that we're not as accustomed to, although certainly historically it was a role that we had. But I think what we're finding is that when the rubber meets the road, nurses are up to the challenge. And that's been very heartening to see. I've been doing a lot of work going from unit to unit, working with nurses in the period of the end of March and all through April. And in the various groups that I've led now, I've been in contact with probably 1,400 different staff members. Now, some have been multiples. They're not 1,400 unique people, but I have covered most of the units of the hospital and teams like phlebotomy and x-ray and so on and so forth. And it's amazing to see how people are landing on their feet. And, you know, the degree to which they're managing the stress, I think, partially speaks to what their history has been as nurses. I mean, if you've been an oncology nurse and you're used to watching people die, it's a lot less tough than somebody who went into something like ortho, where, you know, many of the people who are on orthopedics go because the surgeries are generally elective, the patients are generally healthier. I think if we had recorded this 6 weeks ago, I would have been telling you a different story. But it has been wonderful to watch our staff land on their feet.
That is very encouraging. It's good to hear, especially at times where we're hearing news reports about the thousands of healthcare professionals just here in Illinois that are testing positive for COVID-19, including a lot of your nursing colleagues, unfortunately. We are also hearing, even through the national news, but one of the things that I heard on one of our Chicago news stations that struck me, they referred to nurses as being a special breed of hero. And I couldn't agree more. I admire you and the work you do and all of the nurses that I've known over my life so much. It's a calling, as you were mentioning before, it's a legacy for a lot. And it really is there has to be a foundation of some sort of unyielding passion and drive to help others that you're fulfilling through that calling. You go into situations without a second thought of your own well-being, and you place yourself in the face of life-threatening illnesses throughout the healthcare system all the time. This is incredibly courageous. As you navigate through this pandemic, how do you promote a feeling of safety, not only for yourself, but for your nursing staff?
Well, I think this might be a good place to take a look at our slide about psychological first aid and talk a little about why I was drawn to this idea and what we can learn from it. So I think one of the things that's very important to remember is that there are many different programs that you can enroll in psychological first aid, and the World Health Organization has a number of manualized approaches available. But one of the things that I think is important overall is to remember that although everything about COVID seems new, it's actually not that new, in the sense that somewhere, everywhere in the world, at any given time, maybe several places in the world, there are disasters going on, and disasters that are wiping out the local economy, wiping out what people can do, presenting very dangerous situations. And while we don't know as much about COVID-19 yet, we do know a lot about talking to people in disaster situations. And psychological first aid is really designed for non-mental health professionals. And so why do I think that's important? One is I think it contains a lot of basic information that we who are psychiatric nurses grasp intuitively. It's something that we work with a lot. And I think it creates a format where we can then communicate to non-mental health nurses, who are most of them, how they can be in the process of helping feel better themselves and then communicate to their patients how to feel better. So let's talk about what some of the basic principles are. When I work with nurses, one of the first things I talk to them about is safety and comfort, right? And it's very important to let people know that they're safe. And if one were to watch the news, I think that really promotes a feeling of unsafety and that things are just completely out of control. I've appeared on NBC several times just this past week, and they talked about the suicide of a physician in New York. And I think one of the things that's really important to say is that most people do not commit suicide. Most people may be very traumatized and they recover. And so I think that while it's terribly important that we try to identify the people who are in trouble, who don't want us to know they're in trouble, like perhaps this physician, it's also really important to let people know that by and large, they will get through this. They are safe. Whether it's we who are nurses in the hospital, by and large, we're safe. By and large, we know what to do. We have a culture of addressing risk. And most hospitals have some or enough supplies. Yes, there are a few, tragically, that are really suffering from lack of supplies. And certainly the tidal wave hit New York before they were able to be completely prepared. And we saw some of that in other cities as well. But I think many places are prepared, even if not as completely as they would like to be. So that's the first thing. The second is that it's really important to let our staff and our patients know that if you're sick, it's probably safest to be in the hospital, right? So if we're talking to colleagues who are bedside nurses, we want to let them know that, if your patient is there, that means they're getting the best care. They're in the right place, right? Conversely, we also know that 80% of people don't need hospitalization. So how can we recreate that sense of safety for a person at home that's feeling miserable, right? I know that our hospital, for instance, has a program that checks in regularly on people who are COVID positive, but are at home. And so they're checked in quite regularly to find out how they're doing, not only from a physical point of view, but to find out how they're doing. So we want to create that sense of safety and comfort. And it's very important that when we're creating safety and comfort, that people get small doses of information. We don't want to give them too much at once. Short, brief pieces of information. When people are very anxious, they don't concentrate well, right? And then the other thing is we want to encourage them to disconnect from the day's news, right? It's very easy to get swamped by the bad news of the day. And so we want them to get one dose of news a day, preferably, and then not more than that, right? If you've ever been somebody watching hurricane news, for instance, on the Weather Channel, you know, they repeat the same thing every 15 minutes, and it doesn't have anything to serve except to make you more scared. So disconnect, right? Invest in things that make you feel better. And so this is where we talk about creating calm and creating contact and engagement. So, you know, this wonderful little box here, it's capable of connecting us to the world in amazing ways. But Rachel, who knew that we could have, even just a few years ago, free video conferencing with anybody anywhere in the world? You know, at the beginning of all of this, I picked up the phone, I called a friend of mine in Sri Lanka. Does anybody know where Sri Lanka is? It's an island south of India. And we're having a conversation, me on the way to work in the morning, him having dinner, and it's like he's next door. It's amazing. It was free. So this is the time that we should be using our boxes to connect to friends and family. Now, we should also be using it to avoid things that are there to upset us. So we want to be very careful. I am very cautious about media like Twitter. And Twitter is very useful for a few things, and it's really good at whipping up rage and sadness and negative emotions. So folks, I think my recommendation to you would be back off the Twitter, right? Be selective in what you choose. If you're using Facebook, really stick to friends, stick to swapping recipes. You know, if you're on Instagram, pick stuff that makes you feel good. You know, stay away from all the stuff that's designed to make you feel upset and unsafe. And certainly stay away from information that is being purveyed by people who are not experts in this. Because although there is so much we don't know, we have only to look at the problems with putting front and center medications that have no evidence. So, so let me take a deep breath there. And, you know, I think that when we look at this, it gives us a very intuitive structure. This is what we do in psychiatric wards. This is what we do in groups, in IOPs, and in partial hospitals. We do these things intuitively. This is a way for us to connect and share this with our colleagues who is not what they do.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much, Tony. You made some really wonderful and eloquent points, as always. And you did a really nice job of walking us through psychological first aid. And as you mentioned, you don't have to be a professional to do this. So these are things that we can all incorporate. And again, with that message of media in small doses, and really, you know, that most people are going to come out of this okay, but it's also okay not to be okay every single day through this. You know, we can't expect everybody to be at their optimal level during this type of unprecedented stress and anxiety. So thank you for really honing us back into that. And I know some of the things that you do and some of the things that have been featured on these news stations are these amazing mindfulness and breathing exercise techniques that you share. I told you, I already complimented you on your moves. I had no idea that you were so skilled. Could you just share a little bit about that with our PsychU community, how you're incorporating some of these breathing exercises and mindfulness techniques and psychological first aid with your staff?
Sure. So I started off using some of this as in a more didactic kind of way with the staff. But one of the simple interventions that is recommended in psychological first aid in a number of the manuals, and also the World Health Organization features it as one intervention to try for a non-professional in mental health to use, is simply deep breathing and mindfulness. So it's lovely that the modern literature has finally caught up with something that is, thousands of years old. And, but the thing that's amazing is really how well it works. So I started off going from unit to unit and talking to nurses about, in general, some of these principles and a few things they could say to their patients. And then I would say, and here's something that I'd like to try with you so that you can have a taste of it in case you want to try it. And so I do groups, and we've seen in our hospital with our staff, even as little as 3 or 4 minutes helps. I tend to do about 12 minutes, maybe 14 minutes, which is a long time to get in the life of a nurse on the unit. But if you can get it, what we find is that that kind of deep breathing and concentration is just lovely. You can feel the energy on the unit change. And what I do is I talk people through it. So first I'll do a little bit of movement and, you know, just to get people in their bodies, just to get them in the sense of breathing and moving together. So it might be as simple as doing, you know, breathing in, stretching over, breathing up, down, the left arm, both arms open, so on and so forth. And then what I'll do is I'll ask them to start breathing. I'll give them a count. And I ask them to breathe in for 4 and out for 4. And I talk to them about the basis of breath, right? So some people are very science-minded. They're not, they don't get the mindfulness thing yet. So I start with the science-minded base of it, and that is we know from nursing school that oxygen plus glucose equals energy plus carbon dioxide. Very simple. It's a nice concrete thing people can wrap their minds about. So I ask them to breathe into their bodies, to breathe energy into their bodies, and to sort of do a body scan and to see where does their body need more energy, and to breathe energy into it. Then I'll ask them to check their emotional bodies. As we said, all emotions are welcome and useful. And for us to simply pretend that we're happy and not scared through this, well, first of all, when you're battling an enemy, if you don't have a certain amount of reasonable fear, you're going to make stupid mistakes. So we need people to have a little bit of anxiety. We need them to have a little bit of fear. That little bit of fear is self-preservation, and it's patient preservation. So by helping people identify the difference between the emotions that are adaptive and useful to them and the ones that are excess, you know, so that might be the form of one meditation where we'll have them breathe to check their emotional bodies. And then I talk to them about, and to check their spirit. And then I'll talk to them about exhales. And what do we know about exhaling? Well, we know that exhaling is the longer and slower the exhale, the more the body shifts from sympathetic tone to parasympathetic tone, from fight or flight down into a more centered, calming state. So one of the things we want to do is we want to help people with that shift. And so at that point, I might stop counting, encourage a longer, slower exhale. Again, for the science-minded types, I let them know that they're getting rid of waste product and that they're restoring their acid-base balance because, of course, when we exhale, we get rid of carbonic acid. I mean, there's lots of good reasons for nice deep exhales, right? So one of the things that I will then take people through, once I get them inhaling and exhaling, I'll remind them that they might just have thoughts. Notice the thoughts. Don't fight the thoughts. Don't fight the feelings. Just notice them and then move forward. And when the move forward, we might do a meditation. We might not, or we might. Frequently, my meditations will guide them through things like recognizing their good emotions versus their bad emotions, or recognizing that what we are here to do is good and caring things, and to stay rooted in the fact that what we do is good and caring and courageous, right? Other times, it might simply be working with them to recognize that they are doing what healthcare providers have done for hundreds of years, and that is face a disease that doesn't have a cure, which doesn't necessarily make it fun, but means that it's something that is what we have prepared to do. That is the legacy that has come down to us from hundreds of years. That, you know, having an answer to every disease is not actually typical of the history of medicine. I lead people through this. Maybe 12 minutes, that's usually enough to get them into a new place. Sometimes 12 minutes is too long for what the unit can handle, in which case it might only be 6 or 7 minutes. But even that creates a change, a shift that people notice. And it's something that any of you can lead your colleagues through. And it's something that's available to us at any time.
Yes, absolutely. And I did the little breathing along with you there as you were demonstrating, and I felt calmer almost instantly with focusing on just, you know, breathing out, to your point. So thank you for that. Thank you for that demonstration. And hopefully we'll be able to connect people to more examples of some of the mindfulness techniques and some of your amazing moves in motion in the near future.
And if you're not sure what to do and this seems alien to you, I'm sure if you get in touch with anybody who's been a yoga teacher, they'll know how to tell you how to do it. Okay?
Absolutely. And there's so many free yoga classes online now as well. So that's one of the things that's actually a highlight, I guess, and something that we could take advantage of during this time. Good quality yoga that you used to have to pay for is now readily available on the internet. So
and lots of apps. There are lots of meditation apps out there, many of which are free.
Definitely. Thank you so much. We're starting to wrap up our conversation today. And I hope we can kind of talk a little bit more about what your perspectives are on the potential impact. I know we've talked a lot about some of the specific trauma. To your point, this, even though this isn't a new thing, we don't have a cure right now, we don't have a treatment, a viable treatment right now. We have been faced with a lot of situations like this in the past, but this is a new disease and it is scary. And we are seeing some unprecedented loss that nurses get pulled in to be grief counselor and to act in a lot of different roles, maybe at a sort of magnified level from a normal day-to-day job prior to coronavirus. It's about the impact of witnessing some of these losses time and time again over just a short period of several weeks to months for nurses and healthcare providers. And then in addition to that, how do you think this pandemic is going to change us?
So in talking about the witnessing of loss, I think it's very, very important that we take care of ourselves. You know, it's very important that we take care of and pay attention to our own emotions, that we pay attention to our own capacity. Very early on when this was going on, there were times when I would have to say to people, I'm sorry, I'm looking after the emotions of an awful lot of people right now. I can't take care of yours at the moment. I need a break. This is my break. I think that we need to pay attention to what our vulnerabilities are. You know, for some people who have a history of trauma, history of depression, anxiety, bipolar, obsessive compulsive disorder, these things can be really triggering. We might have had them under control, and this might be stirring the pot. If we're struggling, stop struggling. Please get help. Please, just, you know, don't forget, in order for you to be strong, you got to make sure you're strong. So just like they said in the airline, take the oxygen mask, put it on yourself, then you can take care of other people. And be aware of your capacity for being with death. Now, in terms of talking to a person, sometimes they just need to grieve. And grieving is normal and it's healthy and it's not pathological. And so sometimes just sitting with somebody and letting them know that you hear them is enough. They may not need you to do anything. Sometimes a person just needs to be heard, right? So what's the impact? I think the impact is tremendous. I mean, we are people who, through training and practice, see tough stuff every day. And we are in a position to care for people. We are in a position to be advocates for people. Nurses are trained to be advocates for people. And I certainly hope that people will also take that advocacy out into the world, because right now, especially when states and cities are talking about cutting essential workers, if that means mental health gets cut, then we got a problem. So mental health, which always seems to be the one to get cut first, we need nurses to speak up about that. And how's it going to change us? One of the meditations I do with the nurses is I ask them to envision years from now when they are telling people the story of what happened. And here's what I believe. I believe that times like this teach us how much we have to offer. I believe, because I've seen it and because I've experienced it. And by the way, I got to tip my hat to the nurses who are going in those rooms. I mean, people give me credit for going in the COVID units, but I don't go in the rooms with the patients. I'm the line behind the front line. So I give them all the credit in the world. But what I've seen and what I believe we will see more and more of is how us facing our fear changed us into people who are much more courageous. You know, it's kind of like jumping out of a plane. You know, we're skydiving here and it's very scary, and we're learning we can handle it. I think we're learning that we are able to be compassionate, even under the worst of circumstances. We're able to be tremendously loving and compassionate. And my fond hope is that instead of coming home feeling exhausted and depleted because we gave and gave and gave till it hurt and there was nothing left, that as we give, as we create 100 kind small acts a day with our patients and with each other, that we breathe that back into ourselves, that we really come home full to the brim with the fact that all our workday or night, we've created kindness and goodness in a world that is thirsty for it. And that is how I think that we will be changed by this. If we allow ourselves to see that every time we fluff a pillow, every time we say something kind to a person who's struggling against a major infection, or ones who are in other parts of the hospital and terribly afraid, what if they get this too? You know, or people who are sick at home, or family members of people who are sick. That's what we do. We create goodness and kindness in a world that needs lots of it. And that's what I really hope we take from it, and that it fills us to the brim and makes us stronger every day and helps us feel better about ourselves.
Let's definitely hope that is the case, and that's what we're left with. I know some of these showings of support and love that you see all across the globe now are definitely inspiring, and it does show us what human nature can do. So thank you for those words. I knew you were going to leave us on a high note. I knew you were going to give us some wonderful things to embrace and to take away a positive from this. We thank you for your time, Tony. We thank you for all the wonderful work that you're doing now out there in the world and with PsychU with the Nurses Corner, and we're looking forward to much, much more in the future. And thank you to our PsychU community for joining in and listening. We look forward to sharing much more information with you over the coming weeks and months and hopefully years. So with that, I will say thank you so much to everybody. And we hope you are all staying very safe, healthy, and as positive as you can be out there. So thank you guys.